So I'm going to start off by learning a little bit about you guys and then telling you about myself, and then I'll get to my main presentation, which is going to be on a mixture of my books, but specifically talking about teaching religion to children and how that applies here in the Philippines as well as around the world. So my first question I want to ask you guys, just by show of hands, how many of you were raised to be Christians? Wow. Well, that's not surprising, but it is, it's shocking to me, but it's not surprising when you look at the statistics. And as other presenters have covered, there are more than 80% of people not just Christian in the Philippines, but specifically Catholic. And what happens when people are surrounded by like-minded people their whole entire lives, from their family to their friends to their extended family and anyone they come in contact with, if they all share the same beliefs, it tends to be very easy to accept those beliefs, and they start to avoid thinking about them. So that's what I've observed, not just here, but around the world. In the United States, we have a similar situation where we have about 80% Christians, but they're not Catholics, so it's definitely interesting to see that dynamic as well. The cultural differences come into play when you talk about Catholicism in Philippines, because like I said, in the United States you have an entire group of the same 80%, but they have different Christian views. So they're not going to Mass, and they don't have prayer beads, and they don't have any of the same rituals that Catholics have. And similarly, we have other cultural differences. I've just learned about this recently, but tell me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, but usog, not too common of a belief I hear around here, which is great, but people too do tend to believe that certain illnesses can be caused by just about anything, meeting a stranger or any type of interaction. But that's no weirder to me than what we do in America, which just one of many is chopping off rabbits' feet for good luck. And do you guys do that here at all? That's weird. All right, thought so. Thought I'd check though. So basically what that boils down to is that religion itself is geographical. And there's a quote there at the bottom about that. But my point is that wherever you are, the vast majority of people tend to align their beliefs. And that can be problematic for people who go against the status quo, which includes every single person in this room. So congratulations for you guys for stepping up and being those people. So I, like most of you, like almost all of you, I was raised by Christians, but I was never a Christian. And maybe some of you can identify with this, but what happened for me was I went to church every Sunday. My parents, my grandparents, everyone was Christian. And I went to church and I learned about Jesus walking on water, and I learned about him turning water into wine, and a lot of water-based activities he did. And I really enjoyed the stories. I loved Joseph and his coat of many colors. It was a genuinely great experience for me. I enjoyed going to church. I got lots of candy, played a lot of games and stuff as well, which is part of how that whole system works to kind of get you hooked on it in the first place. But I really did enjoy it. And one day I had something else to do. I told my grandma I don't know what I did back then, rollerblading or something. I told her I didn't want to go to church that Sunday, and she told me I was going to go to hell. And I was blown away. I really had no idea that anybody at that church thought that these were all true stories. I really thought that they were all I thought it was story time every week. And I enjoyed a lot of the morals that we got. I mean, I was turn the other cheek. These are good things to learn, so I didn't really necessarily need the supernatural aspect. So a lot of people think that when they find out that I was raised by Christians, but I was never a Christian, they think that I was too smart for it, or I figured out that it was a scam early on. I really just didn't even know that it was supposed to be true, so it's kind of the opposite. These are my parents. They still love me after all these years. My mom is now, she would consider herself an agnostic non-believer, basically. and that's after reading my work and reading my books and stuff. She used to be a Jehovah's Witness, so that was a pretty big transition. Then we have my dad, who I call him a cultural Christian. He is a Christian, but he doesn't necessarily... He's a Christian, but he doesn't necessarily talk about it a lot. He doesn't like to think about it a lot. He doesn't enjoy reading my books, but he does begrudgingly. He's the type of Christian that doesn't know very much about the faith at all, but he'll cling to it at all costs. And he still loves me as well. He still writes on my Facebook page, although my mom does every single day, so that's a little more extreme. She's my biggest fan. So I was so interested after I found out that people took religion seriously. I didn't go running and screaming away from it like a lot of people assume that I would, or a lot of people did. And instead, I started going to church more and more often. I started going to different churches, different religious services, 2 or 3 times a week from age 13 and up. And when I graduated from high school, nobody was surprised when I said I was going to major in religious studies. It was just kind of accepted. But when I tell people I majored in religious studies, they think that I studied Christianity or I studied religion as though it's true, and that's just not the case. I went to a secular university, UC Santa Barbara, and we learned about religion, we learned about its roots, we learned about how they formed, we learned about how they interacted. One of the most interesting things to me is to look at different cultures and see where their religions traded items. Just maybe they're on the same route, or there's neighboring cities, and suddenly their superstitions will start to match one another. So that's the type of stuff that I studied, and I really, really enjoyed it. After I got my bachelor's degree in religious studies, I applied for the master's PhD program, and I did exceptionally well, but I ran into an issue. I applied to the program, and without ever submitting an application, I had a meeting with the dean of admissions for that department, and we sat down. She was very cordial to me at first. She asked me my name. She typed it into Google. She saw the first link, which was my self-published book there. This is the first version of Disproving Christianity, and she literally judged a book by its cover, and she said, turned to me, and her first words were, I need to word this very carefully, but you won't fit in with our department's milieu because you're an atheist activist with an axe to grind. I was blown away. I mean, surely, she said the problem wasn't that I was an atheist, but that I was an atheist activist. And a lot of people stop there, and they're like, all right, well, that's understandable. But it's not, because there are Christian activists in that program. There are missionaries. There are Muslim activists. There are people who go from country to country trying to convert people. All I did was self-publish a book. And somehow that, I never submitted an application, and I was already rejected. So I wrote a blog about it, and the blog was picked up by the Washington Times and by a number of other big media outlets. And the school, the student affairs department at my school, ended up getting, I think, upwards of 200 or more letters of support, just asking them why they would reject me and telling them to reconsider me and stuff like that. I didn't want to be reconsidered because I would have worked directly under that professor who rejected me. But I did ask for a letter of apology, which I got. It was definitely nice, especially considering the fact that it came along with a promise that they wouldn't do this type of thing in the future, which is really the most important part for me. It was that experience that actually caused me to write Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist. And a lot of people think that because of the title that it's specifically about talking to your family about being an atheist, but it's really not. The book is about public atheism, and it's about issues that all of you face every single day. For me, it was talking to my dean of admissions for a religious studies department. Maybe if I wasn't an open atheist, if I didn't have my name on my book on Amazon, then I would have gotten in, and that wouldn't have been an issue for me. So those are things you have to consider every time you interact with anyone, whether it's your family members or whether it's somebody for potential employment or schooling, anything like that. The issue definitely comes up. After I wrote Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist, this happened. I know he's big in America, but I'd like to find out here. Do you guys know who William Lane Craig is, if you raise your hand? Okay, cool, good. Well, don't clap for him, though. He's a pretty well-known Christian apologist and philosopher, and one of his fans wrote on his website saying that he read Disproving Christianity, the fan, and he wants to believe in God. He's always been a Christian. He wants to believe in God, but he's having difficulty doing so after reading my book and reading Dawkins and some other stuff. And these are directly from Dr. Craig's website, and these are his real responses, including quit reading and watching the infidel material you've been absorbing. To me, anybody who understands critical thinking can look at this and see it's bad advice. No matter what situation you're in, saying don't absorb the material is bad advice. And that's specifically, I would never encourage any of you, any atheist, to avoid any Holy Scripture, the Bible or anything else, because of the strong arguments that might convince you there's a God. And that alone should tell you that they aren't there. I encourage every single one of you to pick up a holy text. I would never say to quit absorbing that material. Absorb it all you want. And to me, that shows Dr. Craig's insecurities in his own position, but also it shows that anything. You read Dr. Craig's books. I would encourage you all to do that, and you could point out the arguments and then treat it like a homework assignment and send me the rebuttals. That'll be fun. So this brings me to my main talk, which is why we should teach religion to children. And this is something that in America is especially important, and I'm kind of learning here in the Philippines how it comes into play as well. I've generally understood that most of the religious education here is directly from Catholic schools or from Catholic sources, which obviously tends to be biased. So I'll talk a little bit about that. A lot of atheists say that they want to avoid religion completely. They don't want to tell their kids that it exists. They don't want to teach their kids about it. This goes right back to Dr. Craig's response, don't absorb that material. This is the worst possible advice. I think that early and often, if you have kids or whether they're in the public education system or not, you should expose them to religious ideas, especially when they have questions about it. If we don't teach our children about religion, then they'll learn about it on the streets. And I don't know if you guys know who the Westboro Baptist Church is. Anyone? Yes. All right, unfortunately, again. So this is them in the back when they were in Los Angeles, and I took this photo. But this is exactly what I'm talking about, because if you don't teach your kids about religion, they could find it about it from anywhere. They could run into a street preacher, and he could tell them all about the one true religion. So that's the type of thing you have to consider in those situations. An earlier speaker touched on this, whether teaching religion to children is indoctrination, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Specifically because the way that religion is taught, at least when it's taught correctly, when it's taught from a secular academic perspective, is factual. It says Christians believe this, Buddhists believe this. This is when Christianity was formed as an offshoot of this cult, of this religion. It's not anything that could be disagreed with, so it can't be indoctrination. You're not telling them, don't believe this. You're saying, here's when it started and here's how it spread. Here's why we should teach religion to children. I have to convince people all the time, so here we go. Children are interested in it. A lot of people think that their kids are only interested in whatever Disney movie is popular at the time, or in taking naps and eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but they have they have interactions that lead them to have questions about religion, about science, about things that are beyond that. And if you ignore those signs and those questions, then you're going to end up stifling that curiosity. They have tons of questions. They might ask who Jesus is because they saw it on a bumper sticker, or they might ask why grandma's mumbling over her food before she eats it every day. These are things that if you're not religious, which children can't be because they don't understand it, then you're going to have questions about. So it makes sense to be able to answer those for them. They'll understand the context of religion. This is probably the most important thing about teaching religion to children, because a lot of adults still don't understand this. I talk to atheists all the time who tell me that religion was created to control people in a It was controlled. It was created by people who knew it was false, by liars who wanted to control people. In almost every instance, I would say Scientology is the exception, they started as ways to explain the unknown. They started because people had questions and they were trying to answer them with their best guesses. They were saying, well, I mean, just imagine you're an ancient person and you woke up and you look around you and there's plenty of food for you to eat. There's plenty of water for you to drink. The water falls from the sky for you to drink. Everything's perfect for you. It's not hard to imagine that the next step is there might be a God. They just didn't have the scientific method to test for how that stuff happens. They didn't understand evaporation. They didn't understand condensation. So they went with the next best thing, which was their guess, which has lasted until today. Knowing about religion makes people less likely to be religious. And this isn't an opinion or a value judgment. I don't know whether you think that's good or bad, but it is a fact. If you look at countries that teach religious education in public schools from an academic perspective and not from a Catholic perspective, for instance, then they are less likely to be religious. If you look at all the studies from most of Europe and then you compare them to the United States or the Philippines, for instance, then you find out that the less you talk about religion in schools, the more likely the kids are to simply accept what they were taught growing up. You want smart kids. I assume you all do, so I think that keeping them away from anything, especially something as interesting as religion, especially something that people are everybody that your kids know, they're basing their lives on this, so it's an objectively interesting topic. So teaching them about it isn't a bad thing. In fact, teaching them about anything should be a good thing. Now I'll talk a little bit about when and how to talk to your kids about religion, because that can also be a big issue for people who decide to take that step and you don't have the support of public school systems. I do think that it's really easy for kids to understand gods and religion, and because they understand media and they have cartoons and they know who Hercules is and they might know who Poseidon is and Zeus, and it's really easy to make those comparisons because people used to believe in those deities with the same veracity with the same ferociousness as they do today. They would be violent in their belief that Poseidon was causing the waves, and people tend to forget that when they think ancient Greek religion, they think ancient Greek mythology, and that's just not the case. I mean, yes, we define it as mythology today, but it's still a religion, and it was and it still is, and if people believed in it today, then you'd recognize it as such. I would recommend, instead of, also this was touched on earlier, instead of telling your kids there is no God, I would never recommend doing that. I always recommend just talking about the facts. I mentioned before how you can talk about religions factually, and this is no different. You teach them to ask questions, you teach them how to get to good answers, and the answers will come themselves. You don't need to indoctrinate with atheism, which really is possible. I've seen people do it, teaching their kids that atheism is correct and that God isn't real and that no gods can be real. And I've heard 5-year-olds spouting things like magic man in the sky because they heard it from their parents referring to God and stuff like that. And that's perfectly okay if your kid overhears you or something, but telling your kid exclusively this is the way it is and don't question this is the polar opposite of what we're trying to encourage, at least at this conference, I think. This is the most important part of teaching religion to children because there is the chance that your child's going to have a view that is the opposite of yours. And you really do have to be willing and able to accept that, to love your kid no matter what. And I think for the most part, the non-believers I've seen who do teach their kids about religion tend to do very well at this, but it's still something to consider. This is the belief book. This is my book that I wrote to try and teach kids about religion, to teach them about beliefs and where they come from. It is an interactive book, so they're encouraged to write their own stories, come up with their own gods, even come up with their own creation narrative, how the world came to be. There are so many different creation narratives that were invented by people millions of years ago, but we could still invent new ones today, and I think that's kind of fun. Here's some samples from the book. I thought this one was particularly relevant. It's not making fun of Catholics at all. It's saying you might see this as strange if you don't believe in it, but in other areas they might see what you think is normal as strange. But it's still sticking with the facts, and the fact is that Catholics eat Jesus. Here's some frequently asked questions I'm going to skip by pretty quickly. Is this book for indoctrinating children? No. Do you hate religion? No, I actually love religion. I love learning about it. I love how it came to be. I love learning about the specific components of religious traditions. I just hate how it's abused. I hate how it is taken out of its original context and used to discriminate against people. I hate how it has infiltrated certain states and certain countries. And the answer to that isn't to end religion, it's to end those abuses that we're against, because I don't think anyone in here objectively hates religion, except in that it causes people to think something that's wrong, but that's a very minor issue when comparatively speaking. Target age range, there really isn't one. I recommend adults read it as well, especially if you don't understand from 6 to 1006, because adults, especially adults who don't understand where religion did come from, this could definitely be helpful for them. Are kids too young to learn about it? It really depends on the kid. I know I was ready and willing to learn about religions as a kid. I was busy learning every Sunday and thinking that it was just story time. But I think a lot of kids are ready, and you'll know by the questions that they ask. What are you working on now? We're working on the Book of the Gods, which is a second addition to the belief book, second in 3 books, and this one's going to be about all the different gods and all the different cultures, kind of take a trip around the world and learn about all of them. And now I'll take questions.
All right. So do you subscribe to Richard Dawkins' viral mimetic infection, where religious beliefs are installed in one's psyche or psyche during indoctrination, which then becomes an unbreakable barrier for reason and logic?
I didn't understand most of that, but I do think I get it. I don't think it's unbreakable at all. I think that no matter how much indoctrination occurs, no matter how much indoctrination occurs, there's always a chance that somebody could break through with reason and humanism. I don't think that there's ever a moment where you should give up all hope that that's possible. I don't think that it's an unbreakable bond. I think that people do tend to believe what they grow up believing, but I think that with challenges, if they're open to it, then they could always come through.
Okay, here's another question from the audience. How do you cope with social pressure caused by religion?
Luckily for me, being outspoken atheist author has really absolved me of that worry, because anyone I meet, I can pretty much tell them exactly what I do and who I am without them hating me or thinking that I'm a terrible person who's going to eat their baby or anything like that. But I know that it's still a problem for a huge percentage of people, which is why I wrote Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist, the guide to coming out as a non-believer, because those social pressures and those issues come into play every single day. And there are so many different ways of dealing with them that go case-by-case basis.
All right. Next question, coming from one of our audience. I was raised as a Catholic, but only deconverted to atheism recently. I still go to church, but no longer pray, receive communion, and attend services. I only go there to socialize. Is this okay?
I think that's awesome. I think that people, if you enjoy going to a church, you should go to that church, whether it's for social issues, whether it's to learn about religion, the religion itself, which is why I went. I think that that's a great idea, and I encourage you to do that, whoever you are.
We're down to 2 last questions. Reading your books, I understand your views about religion. What can you say about religious bigots?
About religious bigots?
Yes.
I deal with them regularly. and it's no different than any other type of bigot, really. They just have a justification that's supernatural, which tends to lend itself to being discredited even easier than other people. So I never encourage being mean or hateful in response to mean or hateful statements to you. Instead, I always tend to respond with questions, as Bill pointed out earlier, and rigorous challenges to their logic.
And last question is, since you've written Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist, and it's dealing with how to open up and accept their child being an atheist, how about the other way around? For example, the parent really knows that her child or his child has become atheist or agnostic and has been blaming himself or herself for the outcome. How do you deal with that? What do you say to that?
Actually, I wrote Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist so that it's not mean or mean-spirited or anything. And I've actually recommended and had people tell me that they did this to just give it to their parents and say, I'd like you to read this. And after reading it, people have had really good responses, because the book isn't mean. It's just talking about how there are still negative social stigmas. It's going to help them understand their kid better, and obviously not blame them or anything, but instead they're going to just think that this is my child who I love, who's going to grow up and be a great person just like he would have been otherwise. Thank you.